Okay. Good morning, and thank you for joining this live Education and Children's Services Scrutiny Board meeting, which is taking place in line with the revised government regulations. Please be aware that this meeting is being recorded. I'm Jenny Holmes, Scrutiny Coordinator. Present at today's meeting are Chair of the Education and Children's Services Scrutiny Board 2, Councillor Sandhu, Councillor Lloyd, Councillor Thay, Councillor Thomas, Sybil Hanson and Kelly Jones, who are co-opted members. Also in attendance are Councillor Seaman, the Cabinet Member for Children and Young People, and supporting the meeting is Michelle Rose, Governance Services Officer. The other officers will introduce themselves at the start of their presentation. I will now hand you over to the Chair, Councillor Sandhu. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning and welcome, everybody, especially to those of you who are watching this live meeting this morning. So, as said, I'm Councillor Kindy Sandhu and I'm Chair of Scrutiny Board 2, which is Education and Children's Services. So, let's begin. Do we have any apologies and substitutions today, please?
Yes, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Core, Councillor Blundell and Councillor Gittins, Deputy Cabinet Member for Children and Young People.
Thank you. And moving on to, sorry, declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? No? Okay, the minutes. They're on pages 3 to 10. Can we agree the minutes from the meeting held on the 28th of January?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. And matters arising. Any matters arising? The one matter arising was the letter that we sent to all staff and the directors, as well as an article on the intranet thanking all staff for the tremendous amount of work that they've done over the very, very difficult circumstances under COVID-19. So let's move to agenda item 4, which is children's services and the impact of the pandemic, looking at vulnerability and disadvantage. It's on pages 11 to 18. Councillor Seaman, may I ask if you would like to say a few words to begin?
I think at this point, Councillor Sandhu, I'll wait until the presentation and questions and come in at the end if I feel there's anything I need to pick up on. Thank you.
Okay, sure. And if I forget, just remind me that to give you the opportunity to speak at the end. Okay, so could I move to ask Director of Children's Services, could I ask that we move to ask the Director of Children's Services, John Gregg, to introduce and summarise this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. The report that we're considering this morning is an update on the impact of the pandemic in respect of vulnerability and disadvantage and the consequence impact that that's had on children's services. The report outlines some of the key issues and I'll be very happy to answer any questions.
You're on mute, Kindy.
Yes, I put myself on mute because I was coughing. So I was just asking if any of the panel members had any comments or questions to ask of this item.
I have, Chair. Do you want me to go first?
Please, thank you.
All right. Good morning, Councillor Seaman, John, Sonia. I've noted in this briefing note the comments about the drop in cases due to COVID. So what I'd like to ask, the first question I have, is given that the demand fell due to COVID, once restrictions are removed and we have some semblance of normal life again, do we have a robust plan in train to cope with a possible surge in demand as hidden cases become apparent? New referrals we might possibly see. Do we have a build-up of annual leave among our teams due to people either reluctant or not wishing to take annual leave during the pandemic? If we have, how will this be managed to avoid extra stresses due to fewer staff being available? And finally, do we have enough PPE as an authority in case it is needed in the future? So basically, this is fireproofing. John.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Thomas, for your questions. I'm not aware that there are any issues with regards to PPE, so hopefully that takes care of the easy question. Can you just remind me of the first question, Councillor Thomas, please?
Certainly, John. Given that demand on our services fell due to COVID, once restrictions are removed, do we have a robust plan in train to cope with a surge in demand as these hidden cases become apparent?
So what I would say was that in respect of that is that Children's Services is in a far stronger position than it has been previously in terms of responding to spikes in demand. What we saw at in the first pandemic, the first national lockdown last year, was a drop off of contacts and referrals, and work did begin to decrease to levels that were very manageable. And when the schools reopened, as I say, there was a significant spike in demand, and since that time demand stayed high. More recently, we've seen the beginnings of a return to normal in terms of sort of the numbers of contacts and referrals. And what that's done is that's created a little bit of capacity within the service. We fully expect over the next forthcoming period that there will be a further spike in demand as children who've not been seen for some time at home return to school, and we identify the issues that are well reported both locally and nationally around hidden harm. I think at this stage I'd say that I would anticipate that we will have a very busy period, and that it will be very challenging, and that we will come through that as we did in the same way after the first lockdown. In respect of annual leave for staff, obviously the council's made a number of provisions to mitigate for that in terms of allowing staff to take annual leave into the new year, and indeed recognising everybody's hard work and commitment and allowing everybody a thank you by way of an extra annual leave day as well, which I know has gone down very well and has been very valued by colleagues. I think it's also fair to say that a number of staff are likely to want to take their leave later in the year when the outcome of the pandemic is a bit clearer in terms of the lifting of restrictions and the reopening of hospitality, hotels, etc., and possible travel abroad. So in the short term, I think it will be tough. I'm confident we'll get through it and come out the other side. And I think that we will manage the annual leave in the same way that we did the other year, as we have done in other years.
Thank you, John. Councillor Thomas, is there anything you would like to come back on?
No, that is a very full and comprehensive reply, Chair. Thank you, John.
Great enough. Okay, next question. Gavin, Councillor Lloyd.
Thank you, Councillor Sandu. Morning, John. Morning, Pat. Firstly, very quick statement again. Just please pass on thanks to absolutely everybody within your unit, etc. Personally, I think you are the fourth emergency service for Coventry, and it really has done us as a city proud of what you've got in front of us, and how Children's Services have managed to cope under the expert leadership of Patricia and obviously John, yourself and the team, through what has been possibly the strangest and most horrible of years on record, especially in my memory anyway. And just a very quick question for you on point 8.3 from the report, and it's the very last sentence of that. It's young people have liked the virtual contact. Just sort of in the back of my head, when we do return to some sense of normality, is that something that could be continued? Having quite a lot of younger generation liking social media, liking Teams meetings, not having to leave the house, etc. Is it basically, I suppose, a forum where they still feel safe and they could get the messages across and have the conversations without having to really leave their home, kind of a thing, if you get that? And that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. John, are you?
Yeah, if I may. Sorry, Chair. Yeah, thank you, Councillor Lloyd. I think, you know, out of every period of adversity comes opportunity. And there are some significant benefits that we will see moving forward in the way in which we embrace and utilise a whole raft of technology that enhances and strengthens the services that we provide to children and families. Having said that, I must absolutely stress that social work is exactly work. It's work that takes place in a social setting. And what I mean by that is that we are mandated to protect children. And that will require us to visit families and see them face to face. And then on those visits, we will visit the premises, suspect the premises, talk to children, talk to parents, check bedrooms, check kitchens, look for food, look for any indicators that might inform our assessment. And that can only be done on a face-to-face basis. And through the pandemic, we maintained that offer where it was safe to do so. In addition to that, though, we also recognised that there were some circumstances where a virtual offer, a virtual visit, was wholeheartedly appropriate. So, for example, we maximised that in relation to our work with our foster carers, who needed our support, who needed a friendly face to see, but didn't necessarily need the intrusion at a time when they were maybe caring for a vulnerable child, or indeed were vulnerable themselves. We have an ageing population of foster carers, and significant numbers of those were either not available to take placements because of their own personal health, or indeed were shielding with children in placement, and it wouldn't have been appropriate to undertake a physical visit. So moving forward, I don't think we will lose that. I think it will become an enhancement. There are a set of temporary regulations that were laid before Parliament at the beginning of the pandemic, and they continue to run. And we're currently being consulted on whether we would wish these to continue beyond the end of March through to September. I have a strong view about that is probably not necessary to share in this forum today. But just to say that we didn't utilise many of the relaxations in Coventry because we take our responsibilities to safeguarding children so seriously. I think when the pandemic is over, it would be helpful for Scrutiny, possibly in the next municipal year, to consider a further report around how technology is supporting children going forward. We have a good story to tell in Coventry, and that would include the use of a number of electronic apps that children like, including Leaving Well and Mind of My Own. And we'll be featured in Children and Young People Now magazine in relation to our use of Mind of My Own app, which is a piece of software that allows children to share their wishes and feelings with social workers on an immediate basis. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I just wanted to say, Sonia, if you want to contribute, then please feel free to. Councillor Lloyd, did you have anything more to add or question further?
No, John, as always, has responded perfectly and covered every base. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you. Julia, Councillor Potiphar.
Yeah, okay. To John, really, do you feel that there will be any long-term benefits working with our partners, you know, in regards to good practice as to how everybody's worked together during this pandemic that will make improvements, continue?
John, did you get that?
Yeah, I did. I'm just trying to find the words. I think the children's strategic safeguarding system is incredibly complex, and what I mean by that is it's the way in which all the different partners work together, contribute together to support and keep children safe. And I think the reason for that is that some have a child focus, some have an adult focus, but what we know is that the children don't live in isolation. They live as part of an organic family arrangement, and no two families are ever the same. So I think that really provides some background and context to why the strategic partnership is so complicated to manage and to ensure that all the parts of it work in the way that it was intended to support and keep children safe. Having said that, again, we have a good story to tell locally. We have fantastic relationships with health partners. We have really strong relationships with local police colleagues, and indeed we are we enjoy very close and strong relationships with our schools. In terms of practice going forward, I think that the pandemic has required those partners to come together much tighter and much firmer. So some examples of that would be the local Safeguarding Children's Partnership would previously have met every 8 to 12 weeks as a strategic board to maintain oversight of the safeguarding arrangements in the city. Through the pandemic, it's met on a monthly basis. And I think, at the end of the day, it's all very well having processes and systems, but actually what we know is that good, strong partnership working is predicated on and based on really strong interpersonal relationships. I'm pleased to report that there are strong partnerships in place and strong relationships across the city.
Thank you. Councillor Potivan, did you want to come
back? No, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a couple of questions, please. The first of all is just a comment. The report, the briefing note refers to schools being closed. If I could, I'm just mindful of our education colleagues and the fact that schools were actually only closed during holiday periods, that they did remain open for key workers, families, etc. So just to clarify that. And on page 13, under section 4.13, it talks about the challenges in placing children, where the placements, there's a shortage of placements locally, regionally and nationally. So I just wanted to know whether we did manage to place all of the young people, whether, what were the specific challenges that we faced. And also the second question's about agency staff. So from the table on page 15, it shows that, it's more than doubled. And in one part of the report, it talks about the quality of agency staff. So, and the challenges there in terms of recruiting. So I just wondered, have we had to take a pragmatic view with respect to the need for resource and perhaps the quality of available resource to us in terms of agency staff? So it was just those two questions.
Thank you, Councillor Sandhu. I think the answer to your question is yes. In respect of agency staff, I would just like to stress today that that I would recognise that our agency staff colleagues play a valuable contribution, and there are examples of some very strong and some very good agency staff who've chosen a career path to work on an agency basis for whatever personal reason. Having said that, the other side of that is also true, is that there is within the sector a number of agency social workers who are transitioning through local authority after local authority, and where there are questions about their ability and their performance, but because of the way they transition between authorities, it means that they're not necessarily always addressed, picked up, or indeed supported to improve. So it's a very mixed bag. But in terms of that pragmatic response, we've been faced with a position where we had more work than we would normally expect, so therefore we've had to flex in terms of additional social work staff to support mainstream delivery. And at the same time, we've also been faced with a period where people have taken the opportunity to reevaluate their lives and have just made decisions that they maybe no longer wish to do social work either here or anywhere else. We ensure that everybody who leaves is at least offered an exit interview, and we certainly track and monitor trends and reasons that colleagues choose to leave. it's a source of disappointment for me that we still don't have the levels of stability within the workforce that I would like. But we are in a far stronger position than a significant number of other local authorities because of the initiatives that we've put in place, and workforce continues to be a priority for children's services. I think I would also just say that in respect of looked after children placements through the pandemic, what we saw was a number of foster carers choosing to not take new placements. So the supply of foster carers it was somewhat reduced. So in terms of availability, that was a struggle and a challenge. And indeed, we also saw the market shrink in relation to children's homes, because some providers also took the view that they wouldn't admit children. It was further complicated by the circumstances where children had been absconded or had been missing or were newly entering care, and their circumstances prior to their admission, or indeed the circumstances when they were missing, could not be validated, and there was some concern about whether or not that they would be potentially would potentially had COVID and would be bringing that into the home. I'm pleased to be able to report that the arrangements we have in place in Coventry meant that there was no child who could not be placed. But the demand on placements nationally meant that some children ended up in children's home placements due to availability, when actually an assessment of need would suggest that the care plan for those children should have been foster care. Moving forward, we have a small piece of work underway to reassess whether or not those placements remain appropriate, and as foster carers continue to come back on stream and be available, we'll be seeking to see whether or not their long-term needs are better met in foster care. But what I would say finally on foster care is that there continues to be a national shortage of foster carers, and despite the significant progress that we've made in Coventry, we're still in a position where we still need a significant number of foster carers to meet the demand that we have locally.
Okay, thanks, John. You've explained how complex the situation is, and thank you for taking the time to go through that in detail. Do we have any other questions from the panel members? I don't see any hands at the moment. No? Okay. Oh, somebody. Right, I wasn't sure what that was. Oh yes, Kelly. Sorry, Kelly. Would you like to ask your question? Kelly Jones.
Yeah. My question was around families and the young people. We're talking a lot about services and what's happening for them as professionals, but I just wondered, are we gathering any feedback from families that are actually receiving social care input and support throughout the pandemic? Is anything different, and what is their viewpoint, the parents and the children and young people?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we absolutely are. We continue to receive feedback in relation to services that we provide, and I think what surprised me through this period, what surprised me through this period has been that the levels of appreciation have increased. And I think that some of that has been because despite all the challenges that Children's Services faces in the work we do, we have remained open. So our services have remained open as business as usual throughout the pandemic. And that's been at a time when lots and lots of other services have either reduced to a complete virtual offer, or indeed have shut up shop because of the conditions imposed in relation to the pandemic. I suppose in terms of the most stark piece of feedback that I received was from a young mother who was accessing our family hub, and when we were talking to her about the pandemic, she said, to be completely honest with you, whilst I'm concerned about the pandemic, I'm more concerned about how I'm going to feed my children this evening. So and that's why we were obviously able to support her in accessing appropriate provision and ensure that her children were fed. But for me, it was just a stark reminder that whilst the pandemic has been a significant national emergency for many vulnerable families, they have also continued to experience all the same levels of adversity that exist in society, be it food poverty, fuel poverty, domestic abuse, and so on and so forth through the pandemic. And in that respect, the pandemic has just become part of the the operating environment across the city.
Kelly, did you?
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to ask one quick other question around obviously engagement from families, because I know in the paperwork it says that LAC reviews are being held virtually, and I'm assuming other reviews are held virtually in terms of like participation from families and how they can access those reviews.
Yes. I mean, because of the conditions around the pandemic, it's not been possible to bring everybody into a room to have a meeting in the way that we would normally do. I think we are acutely aware that a virtual looked after child review or a virtual child protection case conference is certainly in terms of child protection is an unsatisfactory arrangement, but it's been very much a make do approach in the context of the pandemic. In relation to child protection conferences, as soon as conditions allow, we'll be moving to a hybrid model, which will allow some people to be attending the conference virtually, whilst other people attend in person. But generally it's an unsatisfactory arrangement. What I would say is that our independent reviewing officers are taking more time and trouble to ensure that everybody's voice is heard, and what that means is that the meetings are becoming significantly lengthy period of time before those decisions are made.
Kelly, was that?
Thank you, John. That's fine. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Kelly. Do we have any more questions from the panel members? Don't see any more questions. I think, John, that example that you've given of that mother and putting food on the table for her children, although we sit here and read these reports, and it's when we hear of real life experiences that really bring to the fore, I'm sure for all of us, of the importance of the work that we do and everything we can do to scrutinise it and make sure that the service that we provide really does make, under the challenging circumstances, make the difference that we hope it does. And before we move on to the recommendations, I promised to go back to Councillor Seaman to see if she had any final words that she wanted to say. Councillor Seaman?
Thank you, Councillor Sandhu. Just to say thank you very much for the probing questions in regards to this report, and obviously the expert responses by John Gregg really gives a flavour of the challenging operating circumstances of the past year, and how Children's Services has risen beyond and above in responding to that in the most flexible of ways, and during that period of time, to the best of our ability, meeting the need of those families, those children and young people. I do believe that from the first lockdown to now, we've learnt a lot during this process, particularly after the first lockdown, where literally everything else locked down except Children's Services kept going. And I think subsequent lockdown has meant that other organisations and groups have realised that wasn't necessarily the best strategy, going completely virtual as they did. So I do think a lot has been learned during this period of time, and likewise working with our partners has really strengthened as well. So there's lots. Although it's been really sort of challenging, there's been real pressures, I do think that we'll come out a bit stronger at the end of it in terms of what we've learnt, and our practice will improve with that. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Seaman, for that very insightful summary and puts the context of all the work that is done within children's services within the constraints that we face. So I'm minded then to move to the recommendations. First of all, to note the action of considering the use of having a work item to look at the use of technology within children's services. And just moving on to the recommendations, to note the current situation, progress and impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on children's services and partners, to identify any areas the board may want to consider in more detail at a future meeting, and we certainly have with regards to technology, and identify any further recommendations for the appropriate cabinet member. I don't think we had any further recommendations. So is the panel in agreement with these?
Aye.
Thank you. Okay, can we now move on to agenda item 5, please? Now, this is a regular report that we get regarding children's services and continuous improvement. Again, I'm just minded if Councillor Seaman wants to say a few words, but of course, you know, if you prefer to speak at the end, that's fine. But I just feel I would like to give you the opportunity.
Prefer to speak at the end on this one, Tal.
Thank you. John, would you please take us through this report, please?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the report that we're now considering is the regular updates to Scrutiny Board following the each children's improvement board that takes place. I think the two key points that I would like to make was that the first one being that there was no requirement for us to continue to operate a children's improvement board after 2017 when we were judged to require improvement to be good, but the council felt that it would be appropriate to continue to monitor at an exec level the continuous improvement of children's services, recognising the journey of improvement that we've been on, and that was something I wholeheartedly supported. But it was also always intended that we would return to a business as usual approach at the appropriate time to recognise not only the progress made but also the confidence of the council and partners in children's services. And it was always intended that would be after our next inspection, where we aspired to be judged to be good. Our current framework for inspection would have suggested that we should have had our inspection any time between March and September 2020. The pandemic has meant that did not take place. The arrangements that Ofsted have now put in place post-pandemic are that they will return to a assurance visit exercise of all local authorities in the first instance, and these will be similar to the focused visits that we've experienced in the last 2 years. Following that, they will return to the usual regime of inspection on a rolling 3-yearly basis under the ILACS programme. Given that that's Ofsted's position, we considered carefully whether or not to continue with the improvement board at this stage, and felt that on balance now was still the correct time to transition to business as usual, although noting that we hadn't had either the assurance visit or indeed the large inspection. So going forward, the local Safeguarding Children's Partnership will monitor and oversee the partnership arrangements for safeguarding, including children's services, as is the case up and down the land, and the Children's Improvement Board has now ceased. I think the only other point of this report I'd like to also just share is that we continue to make significant progress and improvement, but it would be fair to say that the pandemic has had an impact in our improvement journey. I think at that point, I'll pause and I'll be happy to answer any questions colleagues may have today.
Thank you. Thank you for putting that in context, John. Do we have any comments or questions from panel members, please? And I remember to keep my mic on this time. Okay, well, I just had one question, John, which was really, I know you talked about the Ofsted, and I have read in the report somewhere that they're coming in April. Sounds a bit ominous, doesn't it? The way I've phrased it. And that's what Ofsted have confirmed, that the annual Ofsted conversation will be held in April
9.3.
Yeah.
So just for clarity, as part of the ILACS framework, each year we participate.
Could Councillor, sorry, John, to interrupt. May I ask all panel members and other participants to just mute their microphones, please? Thank you. Sorry, John, please continue.
As part of the ILACS framework, each year we participate in something called the annual conversation, which is a 3-hour meeting that takes place at Ofsted's offices, where we present our self-assessment for the forthcoming year, and our journey of improvement, and our plans, and effectively we get quizzed on it. And that's basically what's happening in April. In theory, the annual conversation is the precursor to any further follow-up action from Ofsted. So in my mind, obviously everything that Ofsted do is unannounced. So we'll get a phone call, and then subsequently they'll turn up for their visit or their inspection. But in my mind, I would anticipate that we'd have the annual conversation in April, and then within the next 6 months we would anticipate that we would receive a focused visit, or the assurance visit, which asks questions about how the council responded to the pandemic in relation to children's services. And then after that, when we return to the full programme of ILACS, I would expect that we would get an inspection relatively quickly. Two reasons for that. Two reasons for that. On a regional basis, Ofsted maintain a risk matrix to determine their order of their schedule of inspections. And I think, given our profile and our journey and what happens in the city, I think we're probably mid-table, so to speak. And what I mean by that is that there are local authorities who are doing better than us, and there are local authorities who are doing worse than us. And I think the other reason that they'll come sooner rather than later, is because our last inspection was now back in 2017.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from the panel? I don't see any hands. As a panel, we were discussing we thank you for these regular reports, and we note that all the work and the hard work that's going in, and Councillor Lloyd phrased it really eloquently earlier by saying, you're the fourth emergency service, and with your comments, John, around business as usual, and we note that the Children's Services in Continuous Improvement Executive Board, if I've got the name right, is terminating, and so the business as usual will be part of the Coventry Safeguarding Board. And so we're wondering whether we'd like to suggest that we have an annual report that sets out, rather than these regular reports, what we would like to have is an annual report that reflects Children's Services progress against the plan. And from that, sorry.
No, sorry.
And I was going to say, yes, no, and just to clarify that, and if there's, obviously as a scrutiny board, from that, if we see that there's any other items that we would like further information and briefing on, that we would still request that. But we just felt that, given this report and given what you've said and how similar this report is to agenda item 4, that we felt this was the most appropriate way to move forward.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Sandhu. I would echo that. I would be very happy to provide annual reports on the progress of children's services, and obviously continue to come for specific agenda items throughout the year. I think that would make sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Seaman, there's no more questions I see from the panel, so I'd just like to invite Councillor Seaman to say a few words if she wants.
Thank you, Kindy. I don't think I've got anything further to add to this one. I think everything's been really covered really thoroughly. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Okay, so could we move on to the recommendation? So the The recommendations are the Education Children's Scrutiny Board are recommended to note the current progress, which we do, identify any areas the board may want to look at in more detail, and we've discussed the replacement of these regular reports with a annual report that looks at progress against the plan, and identify any further recommendations for the appropriate cabinet member, which apart from that item really, we haven't got any other recommendations. So do the panel accept these recommendations?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, so moving on to the item I'm most looking forward to, I have to say, is agenda item 6. So this is to do with the Family Valued programme, looking at family group conferences, working with Leeds Council, Leeds City Council. I think I'm right in assuming that Councillor Seaman would like to say a few words at the end. So may I move on to you, John, just to tell us some good news for once.
Thank you. I am delighted to be presenting to Scrutiny Board today the proposals set out in the paper around strengthening families and our participation in the Family Valued programme. The Strengthening Families Family Valued programme is a Department for Education innovation funded programme, and colleagues I'm sure will remember the announcement from government a couple of years ago in respect of the investment of £85 million into children's services. There was a competitive bidding process that then took place, and 15 local authorities were successful to participate in one of 3 shortlisted options. One was the Leeds Family Valued programme, and the other 2 were Hertfordshire's Family Safeguarding Model and the Yorkshire's No Wrong Door project. We considered carefully all 3 options, and we felt on balance, given our journey of improvement, given our foundation, and indeed that we already work closely with Leeds as a statistical neighbour of Coventry, that we would participate, or we would bid to participate in a Leeds Family Valued programme. And I was really pleased to announce previously that we've been successful. Although this programme started back in 2019, when we were invited to go to London and then subsequently submit an application to bid for, when we were successful, we were not told the amount of money or when we would be starting the programme. And since that time, we've continued to engage in the Department for Education, and it was confirmed recently that we would be go live for this as of the 1st of April 2021. I'm very pleased to also say that the reason that this paper has been presented in this way is because it's not only going to Cabinet, but it's also going to Council in light of the size of the financial implications for the Council. And I'm pleased to be able to say that this equates to a 2-year grant of £2 million per year for children's services to implement this model. The model, in short, is a change and culture change programme, which will see a much stronger focus on valuing families in the context of assisting them to solve their own challenges, rather than intervening in a traditional way as we have done in Coventry previously. And there are a number of strands to this that are set out in the paper, which I won't go into too much detail on, but I did just want to draw colleagues' attention to the fantastic expansion of the Family Group Conference service. So we currently operate our Family Group Conference function with 1 team. This additional resource will allow us to move immediately to 3 teams. The other area will be a significant amount of awareness raising, training for staff, and indeed the appointment of a number of colleagues who will have a lead role around developing relationship-based and restorative practice in social work across the children's workforce. The outcomes that we hope this will achieve will be a reduction in the overall number of children subject to a child protection plan, and indeed the number of children who subsequently become looked after by the local authority, because we've been able to solve their family issues at an earlier stage, and with a final aspiration of an anticipation, if we can demonstrate success, we would then be able to mainstream this model and it would become business as usual. Happy to take any questions at this point.
That's great. Thank you, John. I see we have first question from Councillor Thomas. Christine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John. And first of all, my congratulations to everybody who was concerned with dealing with this bid. It is surely great news for a service that is under a lot of stress at the moment. What I'd like to ask you, though, is what exactly is the process with the bidding? Can you describe the bidding process and what we've learnt through our experiences with making all these bids to make us more efficient and better at bidding? And what were the implications for resources due to the fact that we've had to go through a bidding process to get this money, please?
So, well, the bidding process was extensive. There were 6 stages to the bidding process. So the first stage was a briefing in London. The second stage required expressions of interest. I think then there was a question and answer session with the Department for Education. Then there was a full application, full bid. Then those were shortlisted. And then there was an interview with Leeds City Council. And then there was a panel thing that went to the Department for Education. And the outcome of that was that we were successful. In terms of resource implications, I mean, the public sector is well recognised for flexing and stretching, and that's what we did in this occasion. I don't have a bid writer within children's services. I have considered on a number of occasions whether or not that would be an appropriate use of children's services resourcing. We did have a conversation about it at the corporate leadership team as well, in light of the way in which children's services in the public sector continues to be funded on almost like a patchwork quilt basis. But there wasn't an appetite to do that at that stage, simply because we continue to rob Peter to pay Paul. I suppose what I'd say would be, this would be one of the things that I got up for very, very early in the morning to read before it was submitted to the Department for Education before I started my day job.
Thank you, John. If I may probe a little bit deeper, please, Chair.
Of course, Councillor. Of course.
Dealing as this report is actually doing with money and funding, have we got any idea or a ballpark figure of actually how much it's cost the authority to apply for this bid?
No, we haven't. I mean, I think the only costs associated with this would be in terms of officer time. But what I would say would be that Sonia, who's here today, she's specifically to listen to this agenda item, has taken a significant amount of her time over a significant period of time. My colleague Charlotte, who also was heavily involved in the writing of the bid, as was Rebecca Wilshire, who's the strategic lead for help and protection. So these things don't write themselves. They take an awful lot of time and attention. And I think it's testament to Sonia and to Charlotte particularly that we were successful with this bid. And I would also just want to recognise their hard work and to thank them for that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm satisfied with the responses. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. And on behalf of the panel, we would also like to congratulate and extend our thanks to yourself and your colleagues that you've mentioned who've took all that time to put this bid in, and not only the effort, but also that it was a success. Do we have any other questions from panel members, please? No. I have a question, John. It kind of stems when I did some research on austerity, and I looked at things like the work programme, and what I found was that that programme and others, I know this is going back a few years, would kind of pick the easiest cases, if that makes sense. So, for example, one of the things, one of the the contractors did was to not include people who weren't fluent in English. So, and I presented this evidence, and so that's my question here. Really, is how from a diversity point of view and an inclusive point of view, how will this programme really look at ensuring that we do not pick, shall I say, I hate that phrase, low-hanging fruit, but I can't think of another phrase for it.
Yeah.
But we really, although we have the outcomes to meet, that actually this is about ensuring that those who best suit this programme are within this programme, and it's not a question of, well, you know what, these people have got, there's extended family that live here, or these people didn't grow up in this country, so don't really understand the kind of what family conferences may be like. So it might require a bit more time to explain, etc. So can you talk me through that and give me some assurance that this programme will really be diverse and inclusive?
Yeah, absolutely. So social work as a profession is predicated on, and is the foundation of which is the concept of social justice and the fight for inequality and support to vulnerable people. So I can assure you that there will not be any cherry picking of low-hanging fruit, to coin your phrase, councillor. But what I would say is that we would operate all our services on the basis of risk. So as a starter for 10, I would anticipate that the vast majority of cases moving forward would be subject to a family group conference, or at least the family be offered a family group conference in line with the proposals which are set out in relation to the programme. Having said that, there will always be those cases where it remains inappropriate to offer a family group conference, and the example I would use there would be in those cases where we are dealing with intergenerational, interfamilial child sexual abuse, where it would not be safe to allow either that child to live with their birth parents or indeed with the wider family. But those cases, are where we're dealing with significant levels of risk. Those cases that where we're dealing with emotional abuse or neglect, including domestic abuse, are the cases where this programme will have most benefit. But there'll be absolutely no discrimination on the grounds of race, ethnicity, or indeed language, any kind of language barriers. We have, we operate across all parts of the community, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you for that. I do appreciate it, and look forward to receiving more reports on this really exciting programme. Are there any more questions from panel members, please? I don't see any hands at the moment. Okay, so Councillor Seaman, may I ask if you would like to take the opportunity to say a few words, please?
Oh yes, please. Really excited to say a few words on this one. I think it's rightly that Councillor Thomas did probe around the bidding process, because for every bid we're successful at, there are a number that we aren't, and it just highlights the competitive process when it comes to national funding and how it sets local authority against local authority to bring down much needed funding, and particularly with regard to this particular programme of work, where it's a real opportunity to actually change the way we work with families. This is moving from a process-driven way of working to actually building relationships with family, and I'm really excited about the outcomes and how this is going to develop over the next 2 years. I a number of us were on a conference yesterday with Leeds around restorative practice, and just spending the day listening to how they operate and work, and have really embedded this relationship way of working throughout all of their systems. It sounds very, very exciting, very worthwhile, and producing much to improve outcomes, and actually ensuring that children stay with families. And really, this is what we're about, and this is what we want. So really excited about, developing that relationship-based practice right across the service, and look forward to maybe coming back and giving an update as to how we're progressing. And the one thing that really impacted on me yesterday at the conference is how Leeds actually have a family group conferencing as an entitlement to all families before we go down anything more sort of statutory, as it were, for those families that want to engage. And they've had fantastic results by doing that. So I think we've got something to really work towards with the help of this funding and the support of working alongside Leeds to make this happen. Thank you for the opportunity to give my view.
Thank you, Councillor Seaman, and we do look forward to the progress, hearing about the progress in future. And I think, and we've spent a lot of time talking about the process of doing the bid and making it a success. And I think for someone like me who has to also put in bids for grants for academic work, it's when you're doing your day job and then this another new initiative comes forward, and it's that making that initiative happen as well, so that right at the beginning starting step. So I do take my hat off to John and yourself and the rest of the team who've made this happen right from that kind of initiative to where we are today. So thank you again. So I'd like to move on to the recommendations. The Education and Children's Services Scrutiny Board are recommended to 1, support the acceptance of the grant funding of 4,062,000. Am I going to do a Priti Patel here? Sorry, £4,062,295 from the Department of Education for the 2-year period to support the change programme to spread restorative practice across children's services, and to receive a briefing on the Family Value Programme and further reports on the progress of the project. Do we accept these recommendations as a panel, please?
Yes.
Great.
Sorry.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you again, John and Councillor Seaman, for taking us through this. We really appreciate it. We'd like to move on to item 7, which is the work programme, which is on pages 33 to 36 of your booklet. Thank you, Jenny, for putting it on the screen. Do we have any comments on the work programme? Jenny.
Yes, I just wanted to point out that the date where we're considering the item on adult and children's mental health alongside Scrutiny Board 5, we've had to move that date. It's now been confirmed for Tuesday, the 20th of April at 11 a.m. But obviously members will get that information formally, and there will be a meeting request that goes out. Also, just following the discussion today, we will add an item around the use of technology in children's services, and also progress reports on the Family Valued Programme for items for next year.
And I'd also like to add send provision, please, as a work programme item.
That's fine, we can add that too.
Thank you. Okay, so you've referred, I was going to talk about the new date for that, and so the date on the 20th of April, as Jenny has pointed out, is where we have the joint meeting with Scrutiny Board to discuss mental health. Okay, so any other business? I didn't receive anything beforehand.
Can I just make a comment about the items paused due to the pandemic, please, Chair? One of the things that I'm very concerned and aware of, as will be everybody on this board, and no doubt the people who are listening to us today, is that children have missed an awful lot of education, and I think there should be on the work programme for next year a look at the impact that it's had on children of not being in school, because obviously when you come to Ofsted inspections of schools and the infamous performance tables, it is going to have an impact on these schools, and I would hate schools to be blamed for something that is not within their control.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thomas. We'll take that into consideration. Okay, any other comments on the work programme? Okay, any other business? No? Okay, well, thank you again to the officers and in particular Councillor Seaman for taking the time and to come today and brief us on the progress of the various items. As I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Lloyd said about Children's Services being the fourth emergency service. I mean, as we've heard today, the absolute difficult situation that we find ourselves in providing services to children, but also not to mention the children themselves. So it's absolutely important that we give as much scrutiny and support to children's services as possible. And so thank you for all of the work that you've done. And thank you also, again, congratulations on the Strengthening Families and Family Values programme. That's a real achievement. And a special achievement alongside everything else that you do during the pandemic. And so my final thanks are really to all of the team that put this meeting together. I get to sit in front of the screen and introduce people and get to be the star of the show. But really, it's the governance services, it's IT services, as well as people in children's officers in children's services putting these reports together. So I'd just like to extend my thanks, and also thanks to the public who are watching and listening today. And please, it will be this recording will be on the YouTube channel, and please view it and tell other residents, because there's nothing more important than protecting our children in our city today. So thank you, goodbye, and have a good day.